I love that. That's really spectacular. So what I'm going to talk about is the fact that some of the greatest innovation is happening in the most remarkable places that you would never expect, and that is in Africa. And we're talking about real innovation. So if we look back 10 years or so, this was what Africa was looked at, the hopeless continent. The Economist wrote us off, as did everybody. And in fact, it wasn't just Africa, it was most of the developing world. Argentina would never recover from its crises. The whole of South America was pretty much written off. But 10 years later, things have changed really dramatically. These headlines are from about 2 years ago, when suddenly everybody looked at Africa and thought, hang on a second, like India and Russia and China, Africa's growing really expansively, and Brazil as well. We're part of the BRICS, with a little s in BRICS, as we like to call it, or the apostrophe S. And the reason that everyone's so excited is because of what's happening in terms of economic growth. And 6 out of the 10 fastest growing economies in the world in the last 10 years were in Africa. We know it's true because The Economist said it. And just to give you a sense of the size of Africa's economy is this very clever little graphic which shows you how many of the major cities and major continents would fit into Africa. A lot of things you probably don't know about Africa. The prepaid, who bought a prepaid SIM recently when they went traveling? Anyone? Show of hands? Yeah? 1 or 2 of you? Invented, pioneered in Africa. Most people don't know that. Lots of incredible things have come out of Africa, including one you've probably all heard of, M-Pesa, the greatest revolution in mobile money, and certainly in payment terms, is happening with the most basic feature phones. So not phones like this. Who has an iPhone? Show of hands. Yeah? Who has an Android phone? Yeah? Who has a BlackBerry? Who will admit in public they have a BlackBerry? Yeah? It's not phones like this by any means. It is more likely to be really basic and rudimentary devices like that. But I'll get to that in a second. With a phone like that, you can do money transfers you can't in Europe, and you can do it in a couple of minutes. Of course, the next Steve Jobs has already come from Africa, as we well know. Elon Musk, in case you don't know, is a South African. Spent his first 2 decades, I don't care what you say, 2 decades of going to one of the schools renowned for producing rugby sports stars. You're South African to the core. So if we look back in history, the 19th century was epitomized by incredible inventions and discoveries. Electricity, as this picture of Tesla shows you. Things about the natural world we didn't know. The 20th century was dominated by computers, and the last 25 years of the 20th century were an incredible amount of innovation, or saw an incredible amount of innovation going into things that make all of our lives so possible now, including cloud computing and fast processing. But the 21st century, to my mind, is mobile, 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 mobile. A few years ago, here in Spain, in Barcelona, Eric Schmidt, when he was still the CEO of Google, said Google is a mobile-first company. Their programmers program for mobile before any other device. And my contention is Africa, and for that matter, the whole of the emerging markets, including South America, including a lot of the places that your startups want to touch, is mobile only. People do things with a mobile device. Now, whenever you talk about Africa, you have to put up this picture of Africa from space, and people go, oh, look, it's the dark continent. Actually, it isn't. It's a map of innovation, and it's a very easy to read map of innovation. Everywhere where you see electricity, there's no innovation. Why? Because people are doing what they can when they've got electricity, which is generally watching television or playing Angry Birds. I come from Johannesburg. This is a picture from about 1910. It was a boom town built on gold. And I believe the gold of today is mobile, and not the smartphones, not the smart devices, but the services that you can do with very basic phones like this. And you'll be quite astounded when I show you in a few minutes some of the examples, because a phone like this is beautiful, you know. If you can't tell, that's the iPhone 6 versus the Samsung S5. I mean, they don't look much different from last year's model. We're not talking about devices like that. Why? Because the single biggest problem with that is they're too expensive. The next big problem with them is that they take too much electricity. And the third biggest problem is the data costs too much. More people, 650 million people in Africa have access to technology, have no access to electricity, but they do have a cell phone. And that's really a remarkable way, because instead of having a smartphone, you have smart features. These are the kind of devices that proliferate. And there may be 1 billion people in Africa. We are at the point where China and India's boom years began, the same inflection point. We have what's called a population dividend, a mass of people of a certain age that are willing and able to work, and as I'll show you just now, buy things. But we do have 750 million SIM cards, not users, because people will have multiple SIM cards, and there are very clever ways of using pay-as-you-go at different times, where one network offers you free calls on network, etc., etc. Africa is mobile only, and as this graphic demonstrates, it is not smartphones. It's all feature phones. People are using feature phones to do really smart things. Facebook, for instance, says that there are 100 million Facebook users in Africa. 80% of them are viewing it from mobile. This is a picture I took in Ghana about 2 weeks ago, not Ghana, Tanzania, 2 weeks ago. You've probably never even heard of the brand Techno, right? Anyone heard of the brand Techno? It's as popular in Africa as Nokia. Massive, massive, unknown Chinese brand. And the great thing I love about it is if I say to people with feature phones, are you on the internet? And they go, no. And I go, are you on Facebook? And they look at me and go, duh. You know, what's the Spanish equivalent of duh? Duh. Well, there you go. It's like the guy who asked the Frenchman, what's the French word for fiancé? So people are using basic devices to get on and experiencing the internet in a way that we don't. When I saw the internet, it was on a 14 or 15-inch monitor, you know. It looked like that. The majority of people are going to get onto the internet using a device like this. Now, why is this a great device? Well, firstly, it's very cheap. It costs $15. This is the Nokia 105. It costs $15. It's got a 35-day battery life. Hey? Anyone with an iPhone, or even an Android phone, or you few BlackBerry users, anyone get to lunch with their iPhone? Battery? Never. So it also has a built-in FM radio, which is particularly useful when you've got no other form of media, and it has a built-in torch at the top. There's nobody I've ever seen in South Africa working as a plumber or a builder or any kind of utility who doesn't use their phone as their torch. The GSMA says just in pure terms of building the infrastructure and engaging it, there's a massive market opportunity. But there's so much more, because not only are we looking at the population dividend, which this graph shows, of 1 billion people, 66% are under the age of 30. That means they're a workforce that is willing and able to do things. In the next few years, I think by 2012, 1 in 5 young people in the world will be from Africa. The potential is huge. And I really love this graphic because it shows off a whole bunch of things. But what it shows in the top corner is the middle class. And the middle class are hugely important. Why? Because we buy shit. The engine of any economy is the middle class. They're the people who subscribe to iTunes or Uber, or want to do Airbnb, or this great Airbnb for boats. I love that. That's so Grecian. And it's growing effectively. If you don't want to believe me, believe Barack Obama, who came on a massive tour of several African countries last year. And the key piece of legacy or a policy that they announced on this trip was a $7 billion power initiative. Why? Because that's the biggest problem. More people have a cell phone than they do electricity. And they've done studies, they call it the bottom of the pyramid. You know, the people that are the poorest of the poor are called the bottom of the pyramid. If you're working in financial inclusion, that is where your focus is. How do you give people with no bank account access to financial services? Well, you do it all through the SIM card. And as M-Pesa has shown, M-Pesa is a runaway success story. $29 million a day are transacted through M-Pesa in increments less than $20. 29 million. It reaches 80% of all Kenyan adults. East Africa as well, Tanzania too is a very good success story. They've got a mere 6 million users. I mean, how's that for a user base? And you can do everything with M-Pesa. You can pay school fees, you can buy products, you can pay your electricity utility, and I'm told, I haven't tried it myself, you can even bribe customs officials. So Africa is not for sissies. I'm sure you've heard that phrase, and it's probably a phrase that is appropriate about the whole of the Southern Hemisphere. You'll know that TED, for instance, is being held in Brazil this year. There's a renewed focus on the South, the global South, people like to call it, where the vast majority of emerging markets are. But there's a great figure from the World Bank about how much of an impact broadband has on an economy and what it does. I've seen it in the last 20 years in South Africa. It is truly remarkable, but it is not for sissies. However, I want to introduce you to the epicenter of mobile innovation in the world, or Lagos. Anyone been to Lagos? I mean, we're talking about, there we go, we're talking about the biggest economy in Africa, 150 million people. You cannot drive down a road. There's so many potholes. If you're stuck on the bridge, it can take you 4 hours to get to the airport. Lagos is falling apart structurally, and yet it is booming. People are using mobile phones to do different things. And the same is true anywhere in Africa. This is also Tanzania. This is an example of someone using M-Pesa. These are the kind of transactions, basic things you can do on a basic phone. His is actually something of a luxury phone. And let's just have a quick look at some of the things you can do and the kind of smart services that are possible. This is a guy called Bright Simons from Ghana, and he runs a thing called M-Pedigree. And what M-Pedigree is a way of verifying if medications are real. So the pirates, the counterfeiters realize that real makers of medication put a little holographic 3D bark picture on it. They just put it on everything. So if you're going to spend what could be your month's salary or half your month's salary getting antibiotics or medication, you want to know you're getting the real thing, which is what M-Pedigree does. It also tells you whether it's expired or not. Really simple using a basic device. This is a farmer in Ghana, or I actually have no idea, but the story I'm telling you about is Ghana, and he's standing in a maize field, so let's make him Ghanaian. But the story is really fantastic about a guy who ran his farm, and he rented a piece of ground, but he didn't actually know anything about farming, so he was buying pesticide, and through a series of very basic SMSs, he was taught how to make his own organic pesticide. I don't know if you have the same problems with organic here in Spain that I've noticed elsewhere in the world, which is usually just an example to add a zero. You know, free range, you can add 2 zeros. And he took his organic pesticides, which was vinegar and onions, and he used it instead of the stuff that he bought. And over a few years, he was able to save enough money to buy the piece of land that he worked on. Now, that is really powerful innovation. And what Farmerline does, the service that provides him with the information, is just give him a list of where he can get what products at what prices. And the thing about Farmerline is that a lot of people didn't become farmers by choice. The economic pressures made them farmers, and they've got no idea how to run a business, so they've learned how to do it. This is another incredible innovation called Frontline SMS, developed in South Africa by a guy called Ken Banks, who was helping with rhino poaching. And it's like WhatsApp for SMSs. You send one SMS and it goes to a whole group of people. In Kenya, there's another great service called iCow. I don't know if you can read what it says. It talks about dipping the teat in mustreach and feeding the cows after they've been milked. These are just really basic pieces of advice. So if you want to find a vet or you want to find information that's easy to access it, it's like doing a Google search by SMS. And the dairy business in Kenya is a $463 million a year business. There are 1.6 million small farmers. The difference between an abundance farmer and a as I like to call them, and a subsistence farmer, as everyone else calls them, is 10 liters of milk a day. you produce an extra 10 liters and you can really arrive out of poverty. And there's no reason why Africa couldn't be Europe's new breadbasket. Currently, agriculture is producing $280 million is the size of the business. Is projected to grow to 800 million by 2012. You see pictures like this all over the world. You see it in Africa especially. You see it in the Southern Hemisphere. Why don't we see that? Why do we not see an abundance of solar power? Because that's what we have, an abundance of. Why are people fracking when there is solar power? You can do amazing things with solar power. If you haven't heard of the story of William Kamkwamba, whose life story was summed up in a title about his life called, a book about his life called The Boy Who Harnessed the Wind. A couple of solar panels can change people's lives. Kids can study at night. People can charge their cell phones. They can charge their neighbors to charge their cell phones. They're amazing spin-offs. They're great e-commerce and m-commerce services that are all done via mobile phone. But what's even more remarkable, the guy who's been to Lagos will know, to get anything delivered in Lagos in 40 minutes is amazing. And in fact, if you want to have something delivered to space, ask an African, as Elon Musk has done. That is not how transport is going to be done in the future, unfortunately, and that is not fashion either, men. The greatest exploration of the physical universe as we know it is happening right now in the Southern Hemisphere, called the Square Kilometre Array, built mostly in South Africa and partly in Australia. It will investigate the physical, the greater universe ever. And I'm very pleased to say I have something that you're going to see a lot about. It's called a BRIC, B-R-C-K, and its byline is a backup generator for the internet. Designed in Kenya, this is going to be as popular as any device to connect to the internet ever will be. It's designed very specifically for the internet problems in Africa, which is largely lack of electricity. It'll power 20 devices, connect 20 devices for 8 hours, and it uses everything to connect to the internet. CNN just chose this as one of the top 10 startups of the year in the world. And just in case any of you young startups needed reminders of success, this is how it looks like. This was shown to me by the CEO of a very large innovative startup in South Africa, and about 6 months later, when he lost his job, I showed it back to him. And there you have it. The real incredible innovation that's going on in the world is happening in Africa. And the reason it's happening is because it happens out of necessity. Because Africa has so many real problems to solve, we are solving them. And because we solve them, the rest of the world can use them. Pay-as-you-go is a technology you are a direct benefit of. So there you have it. If you want to see real innovation, you've just got to look at Africa, which has its real problems, and that's how we solve them. Thank you.